Good afternoon. Can I ask who I'm speaking to?
My name is Tami.
Tammy?
Yes.
Hi, Tammy. Today I'm a member of the public, and I'm looking to make a general inquiry regarding data disclosure on deceased individuals.
Okay.
My understanding is that basically, as the Information Commissioner's Office, you mainly regulate two pieces of legislation. The first one being the Data Protection Act, and the second one being the Information Freedom of Information Act. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when as you are aware that when a person dies, they are no longer subjected to the Data Protection Act because the Data Protection Act only deals with living individuals. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, so in under these circumstances, I've inquired how I can get my deceased relatives' information from an organization such as a local authority social service organization. And I understand that if it's medical records, there is legislation in provisions in law, namely, I think the 1992 health record or something. I don't know what the exact legislation is for medical records, but if I was looking to get social care records, um, I have been advised that one avenue may be to go to making a freedom of information request. Is that correct, or is there any other alternative method I can achieve, or any other legislation I can utilize in order to get disclosure of deceased relatives' personal data that an organization had been collecting, which would have been made available under the Free, Data Protection Act, but is no longer applicable?
I understand. All right. What I'll do, because I don't know the exact answer to that question, I'll just need to put you on hold and find out. Would that
Okay,
be all right?
okay, thank you. That's fine.
All right. I'll just be a few minutes.
Okay. Yes, hello.
I do apologize for the long hold. I was just trying to make sure I could give you a concrete answer. I've seen here it says information contained on social care, social services records can continue to be subject to a duty of confidence after the death of the individual concerned, and so could be exempt under Section 41. They too will usually be very personal and sensitive in nature. So it's possible even records of a deceased individual could still be, you wouldn't be able to request them with an FOI.
Yes, that's what I thought as well. Because I've made this request to the local authority, and they require from me, knowing the fact that it's my mother whose data they are holding. I was not sure if it was covered under the Freedom of Information Act, because obviously they are then requesting from me quite substantial documents such as my driving license, passport, utility bills, as identifying who I am, and this level of identification I would object to, even if it was a subject access request, because I consider that is excessive amount of extra documentation needing to be provided for a subject access request. However, they have replied saying that I need to give them a grant of probate, certificate of the will, power of attorney, and such alike, which seems to me to like it's a stonewalling technique, because this data is no longer covered under both the Data Protection Act and the Freedom of Information Act. That's correct, yes?
Sorry, could you say that again?
I said basically the amount of information that they required is excessive, and in regards to even if it was a subject access request, it's excessive for if it was a subject access request that they requested from me. However, this is not coming under the Data Protection Act, but is a Freedom of Information request. Now, if it is accepted as a Freedom of Information request, then they don't need to identify me, do they?
No.
Okay, so because under the legislation of the Freedom of Information Act, the request is request blind, so they don't need to identify me. But they seem to be amalgamating both the Freedom of Information Act and the Data Protection Act in order to request substantial amount of information from me, and then saying it's down to our discretion whether we disclose that or not. Now, my understanding is that, as you've said, there is a level of there is a confidentiality issue post somebody dying, but I think the requirements here seem quite excessive to me. So I just wanted to get some information on this. That the legislation itself requires substantial amount of information to identify the individual requester under the Data Protection Act. Under the Freedom of Information Act, it does not require identifying the requester. But under this third example, where neither legislation applies, how can they request so much information from me?
Yeah, but the question you're asking, it's a mute point based on your scenario. As it is, you can't request for a deceased person's information with an FOI.
Yes.
So even so you asking about the amount of verifiable information they want from you wouldn't apply, because basically you can't make that request.
That's correct. Thank you for that. I'm in agreement with you. I cannot make the request under the Data Protection Act. I cannot make the request under the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
That's correct. But they have accepted the request under the Freedom of Information Act and then proceeded to request substantial amount of personal data. So I cannot apply under the Freedom of Information Act, as you rightly said, because it's requester blind, and there's an exemption. Can you just remind me what exemption that is again?
Well, it says this is not the exact exemption. This is just what our guidance is saying. It says information contained in social care, social services records can also continue to be subject to a duty of confidence after the death of the individual concerned. And so it will be exempt under Section 41.
41. Okay. Now, when there's a duality, when the word duty is referred to, that is prescribed somewhere. So, like for example, the social services have a duty of care when somebody's alive. That duty of care is prescribed in legislation. Now, the duty of care in regards to confidentiality post a person being deceased. Would you be able to tell me where that duty exists in legislation?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just that my mother has died. I'm trying to get some information from the social services regarding her records now that she has died. And I believe, there was a failure on their part of the local authority, and this is like a stonewalling technique. Now, would you be able to advise me that if I can't get my late mother's data from the due to the Data Protection Act or the Freedom of Information Act, look to procure it?
I won't be able to answer that because it's no longer under GDPR. You may want to seek legal advice on that.
Okay.
Because as unfortunately as your mother is no longer a living person,
Yep.
information is no longer under GDPR.
That's correct. I fully concur with you. Now, like I said, under her medical records are covered under a different legislation, which is I think the 1992 Access to Healthcare Records legislation. So I can get her medical records because there is a legislative provision in place for that.
Yes.
And I'm not sure what legislative provisions are in place for information other than medical records.
Well, as it pertains to a dead person, a person who's not living, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to confirm that because I wouldn't know the legislation as it's not under GDPR.
Yes, I understand. And you could not guide me to the correct place?
To be honest, no.
Okay. I appreciate your forthright and honesty on the matter. Thank you very much, sir. That's all I require.
No problem at all.